As you know, we're talking about grays and almost grays in UI design. So we took a look at how different platforms and design teams and app designers use gray in user interface design. Let's now switch a little bit to some other tips that are connected to gray and almost grays in UI interfaces. So for this course, I created this couple of mockups that we're going to reuse in different places and in different ways. One of them is a web app example of some kind of a list where you move from like a lead to someone that you have open conversations with, that you've now closed the sale or maybe lost the sale. So you're kind of tracking the status of all of your opportunities when it comes to sales. And in this other one, we have a wireframe of a mobile app that's connected to kind of controlling your home and devices that you have in your home. So think of like Google Home or Apple Home or similar apps like that. As you can see, these are wireframes, and most likely the part where you're gonna work most on your grays and almost grays is gonna be in wireframing stage. Why? Because it allows you to focus on the most important details about like a hierarchy of information that you're gonna have on your screen. It doesn't force you to focus too much on like colors, typography, even spacing, and some of the elements you might care more or less about them, but they're really not important at the stage where you're just trying to see if the ideas and concepts and the flows that you're working on are actually making sense and are usable by your users. So to kind of limit yourself and don't waste too much time spending on details that only matter if the crucial concept works, one thing that we as designers do is we kind of wireframe. Now, you might do some low fidelity wireframing even on paper, and again, like depending on where you are at the stage of your product, that might be useful, or it's just like putting your ideas down so you don't forget something, because it's really quick and it's really easy to, if it doesn't work, just kind of toss it aside because you didn't spend too much time on it. But in most areas of your design project that you're going to be working on, you're most likely going to be working somewhere in like mid fidelity stages to really high fidelity stages, which are almost like full-on UI design works. So for those, it's really important to at least have some things that you're going to be reusing. And one thing that you're going to notice when you start working with wireframing is that you're going to need at least a couple of shades of gray to make it work. Sometimes you can achieve it just through opacities. So you want to denote something, make it less important. You can just use an opacity like this. So if it was at 100, it would be the same shade of color as all of these other elements, but it's not that important. It's kind of a repetitive element. It's still accessible and you can still read it, but maybe putting it like 70% is going to be enough. Again, don't try to use like absolutely every value from like 10, 20, 30, 40, 45, 50, 55%. Try to kind of limit yourself to a couple of these that you're going to be using throughout your project to still make it scalable and reusable. And then when it comes to introducing color to a UI like this, you're just going to be looking at like what elements need that kind of pop of color and branding, and you're going to be slowly and deliberately introducing color into your design while everything else still kind of works as it did before. So it's really important when you're introducing color into your design that you're not kind of going with a complete opposite of how contrasty it is compared to everything else on the screen. So like if your main branded color is going to be like a really light yellow, that's not going to work in here. So it's just something that you're going to constantly have to kind of go and check if the contrast is the same, and you can really see that it's not anymore. So you're going to have to figure out like, do you need a different shade for the primary color or like accent color that you're going to be using, or do you need to maybe flip the background and make this like a dark UI app or something for your main color to work. Again, even if these two are not going to be the same, the main part is that the contrast is still a lot bigger than it was just like a couple of seconds ago when I was demoing the lighter yellow shade. I'm just gonna copy this here on the top to reset it from the demo direction that I took it in. So besides wireframing, since it focuses you on the context of the app, on the information that you have, and the visual hierarchy of elements, another benefit is that you can really see that a lot of apps are most likely going to keep a lot of the elements still in the grays and almost grays, even when it's complete. So even if we grab a project like this, you can see that it does have a tint of blue inside all of these shades, and that's with purpose. Like, you don't have to work with like just black and opacities of black and like shades of gray that don't have any saturation in it. It's fully up to you to decide, like, do you want to play around with that early on or not, but it is something that you can do. Another important part is that you can use whites, blacks, grays, all of those shades in between to signal elevation as well. So you don't just have to use shadow to signal that something is higher than something else. You can clearly see that the highest parts of this screen are these cards in here, and this part that kind of groups it together and keeps it in like a really long card is actually darker than the background to give it even further contrast and to kind of put even more focus on the elements in here. It could have been done the other way around as well. Like, the background in here could have been a little bit darker, and then this could have been a bit brighter. But it just depends on like the look and feel that you're going for. So anything's okay. This just feels like this part of the screen is kind of indented a little bit, while all of these cards are floating above everything else. So just keep in mind that we usually perceive things that are white as the closest to our phones or screens or whatever device we're using, because they're like the brightest elements that you can have on the screen. So like white, the saturation is all the way down and the brightness is all the way up. Therefore, it's the lightest that you can get to when it comes to color. And as you know, R plus G plus B, RGB together, like you have all of those sub-pixel lights in our screen monitors light up when you have white, and they're the lightest that you can go. Therefore, this is kind of the lightest elements, and since it's the lightest, it feels like it's closest to how we think about it as humans, is like they're closest to the light source, sun, whatever it is, and therefore it's closest to us. So everything else that's a little bit darker usually means that it's kind of down on the levels of elevation that we perceive. And use that to your advantage. One of the weirdest things that you can have is like a darker element casting a shadow onto a lighter or even white element. It works for things that are really branded, like buttons that cast, like a blue button casting a blue shadow on the white background. Doesn't seem weird to us. But areas like these, where a darker background is casting a shadow on the lighter one, it just feels off. So really keep that in mind. It's one of the areas that you're most likely going to see beginners struggle. And also keep in mind that if you're doing things like that, your shadow might be like blending a little bit. So it's going to be really hard to discern from like where it starts and where it ends. You can fix it with some other elements like this. So for example, if we use a stroke and if we set it just to right, if you just use something like this, you can kind of break it off a little bit. So that's one way that can work. Even if it's just like slightly lighter, it really does help with that effect, especially if you make it a little bit bigger. But honestly, my solution for this would most likely be to switch this to a white. Now, white casting a shadow on light gray, that actually makes sense and looks good. And a different way would be to go to the shadow settings and maybe like use a little bit of a darker shadow so that it's not as similar to this shade that we have in here. So really just zoom in and see where you start to really notice the difference. Now it's looking less off. To me, it still looks off because like a darker element is casting a shadow on the lighter one, but it's not as off as it was previously. So yeah, a way that I would usually solve it is just kind of follow the logic of how light works in real life and replicate it to an interface that you're designing. Honestly, that's one of the tips that you can take for anything else when it comes to UI design. Like the closer you can get to what naturally feels okay to us, the better you're going to be as a UI designer. Okay, so now we've covered that. Let's switch to a different part, which is like once you've done the entire UI design process and you have your designs ready, you might have noticed that I did it in here when I changed the color from like this wireframe color that we had to maybe a branded color, is to again double check like if everything else works in grayscale. If it works in grayscale, it's most likely going to work well in color. And also for all of the people who might be colorblind, it's a really great way to test if things are still going to have enough contrast and be usable. So even when you're done with everything, you can still kind of turn this design into a grayscale mode and check if everything works. If it does, you did a great job and you should be proud of your design and kind of move on. Okay, so I did touch upon opacities as a way for you to kind of handle using some of these tones. And again, opacity is something that you can use in other places as well. One of the places that I want to stress is, you can see in here, I used, if I select this navigation bar, you can see that only two colors that are used in this entire frame is the white for the background and this color that is used for everything else. So you can really see that these icons are kind of filled and bold and in your face when compared to light text that's below. If you want these two shades of gray to look like they work together really well, you need to take into account that the amount of color that the user sees in this area is a lot bigger than they do in here. And you can combat that by maybe using like opacity, like this, to make it feel, you don't have to go too far with it. I just put it to like 80-90%, but it already feels like this part is actually closer in color to this, even though they're actually now becoming different colors. So it's a little bit of a weird thing, but like think of it, if you have a lot of blue in one place and then you have text which has a lot of breaks in it, and you use the same shade of blue, it's actually going to feel like the text is lighter and the icon is darker. So to combat that, you actually make the icon use a lighter shade of blue, or the same shade of blue but with opacity set to 80, 90, 70, it depends. But you need to get to that optical balance where they feel like they're working together and they're actually optically the same color, even though they're not. Our eyes are very faulty. So we as UI designers need to take that into account when we're working with color, and we need to, even in areas where it's the same color and it should be like the logical solution for it, we actually need to have two colors that are different, but to us feel like they're the same color. And you can do the same thing for dark interfaces, and I'm going to talk about that in one of the upcoming videos. But basically, like if you have a primary color that works really well on white background, you actually need to tweak it a little bit for it to feel the same on a dark background. So you're going to have two shades. They're going to feel the same to the user, but they're actually like different hex codes. And another thing that I do want to discuss with you when it comes to working with gray is the fact that it really does look off if you use it on a colored background. One of the most common places is, of course, something like a toast message or like a little error message that you get, or success message, like anything that kind of signals the the status usually has a tint of color, or maybe it has like a full-on color like the example below. And if you're gonna be using gray on those, be really careful. A better way to do it would maybe be to use like a darker shade of color, like a darker shade of gray, and maybe set the opacity, because then the opacity kind of allows it to give this shade a little bit of a hint of a color. So if I do it like this, and I just pick a layer and color pick the color that we have in here, it is gray, but you can see that it kind of grabs a bit of that saturation that the background color has, and it's already working a lot better. A different way would be, of course, to just work with that exact hex that already has that color inside. But one thing that you're gonna notice if you have a design system that you're using for all of your notifications, to kind of combat the fact that all of those need to be a little bit tinted, it's usually easier to just use opacity and allow the background color to kind of get inside that gray or almost gray that you're using, and give it just a pop of color and a pop of the saturation. And you can then kind of use it for any kind of background color, be it like a light yellow, a light or dark red, a light or dark green, or whatever. You can still translate it to the gray by using opacity without having to have like 4 different shades of light gray that you're going to be using for toast notifications. So it's just a way to kind of maybe simplify it and systemize it, but it doesn't have to be the solution, and it's not going to be your go-to solution for every type of project. Different ways to solving the same problem exist in UI design. It's just important to know why you're doing it. And another example is in here, where this is using like darker gray, so it's not just like the fully white one, but it's still a very light shade of gray. And it's good because if we check the contrast in here, sorry, you can see that this is going to be like legible and you can read it, but it feels off visually. And you can combat that by, again, maybe using like a lighter shade of red, or you can use white and maybe use opacity to kind of signal that. So just a pop of red is going to be noticeable in this text, but it's going to be enough for us to feel like, ooh, those two colors are working together. There is a sense of cohesiveness inside, and that error message is not glaringly off as like having gray text on a colored background. And yeah, I know that there's a lot of things when it comes to working with neutral shades and grays, but it's really important, like if these lessons and demos are still not clicking, kind of play around with this part. It's going to be a really crucial part in later stages of your UI design career, and to really become a pro, because you do see that most of the interface is usually like white or really dark or black, depending on like, is it light UI or dark UI? And depending on that, like all of the other colors for text, for most of the things that you're going to see on the screen are going to be actually shades of gray, or almost grays. And if you don't master that part, it's going to be really hard to master everything else. So I really do suggest to kind of go through the like tasks that we have prepared for you, assignments for these topics. And if you kind of complete them with ease, just go along. If not, kind of rewatch some lessons and kind of go back. This is a part where I do highly suggest you spend some more time on to fully mastering it, especially because it's so prevalent in wireframing stages and prototyping stages. And it's also really important in all of the stages that come after that as well. So basically most of your job is going to be working with a lot of grays and neutral tones. So really focus on nailing those and knowing how much of saturation you actually need in some of these shades. Okay, I hope you learned a lot in this video, and see you in the next one.